Not all vulnerabilities are caused by code. Do you trust your build infrastructure?
Hey Mike, it sounds like somebody found a vulnerability in Webmin, but it may have been intentionally placed there. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so there's a recent remote code execution vulnerability that was discovered in Webmin. And Webmin's an open source, web-based Linux system admin tool that you can use. It's affected versions 1.882 through 1.921, and it was presented at DEF CON. Interestingly, there was no previous disclosure to the maintainer, so it's kind of the first they had heard about it. DEF CON, they showed a Metasploit module that was developed and some proof of concept where you can actually execute commands as root, and they even showed a reverse shell. So they had some code that actually showed this live. The flaw is actually in one of the modules for changing passwords. So it's a feature that lets you go in and change your password prior to it expiring, and allow an unauthorized user, again, to run these arbitrary commands as root. One thing to note, though, is that reset feature is not part of most default configurations outside of version 1.890. It's kind of when that was actually set as default. If you look on Shodan, recently there was about 215,000 internet-facing Webmin instances, and they found as of publication there was about 15,000 running at that vulnerable version, that 1.890. And it was out on SourceForge. All the official downloads included this vulnerability for over a year. And kind of like you mentioned, one interesting, probably the most interesting part of this is that the vulnerability was not found in any of the code in the GitHub repository, and they suspect that it was planted actually in the build infrastructure. So as the software was built and delivered is when someone went in and put that backdoor in. And they're still investigating it, so I don't have a lot of details of how that happened. But clean builds against the code for all those versions didn't result in any vulnerable versions.
Wow. So let's talk about that difference. I think that's a key thing to bring up, is that the source code itself doesn't include the vulnerability, but the compiled version of it did. So who's building it and where that this was introduced?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of details on what their pipeline is. But again, they were kind of investigating how it went through. I mean, you see Jenkins use a lot of public free compiled tools that go through and eventually publish that out to hosting sites like SourceForge. So they're looking to see when possibly this was injected.
Oh, that's interesting.
So how would that work? Would you re-download the source and then recompile privately and then release it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple probably injection points, you can have along the way. It probably depends, again, on the details of when they kick off a build, but you could, again, inject it in some malicious Jenkins server. Someone could have somehow, have a shim before it gets published out to the repository that it's hosted on. It's certainly, alarming, right, that, we talk a lot about code, and typically that's where you find, 99.99% of the flaws. But in this case, you think about kind of your build process, supply chain, we see that sometimes show up. And it's, you really have to pay attention kind of end to end and do some validation after you've posted your production code.
Wow. So that's kind of interesting for for a bunch of reasons. But the one that keeps coming to mind is like, everyone keeps saying that one of the best ways to improve software is to make sure that it's open source and that the code can be reviewed. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the build process is open source and can be reviewed by anyone, but in this case it suggests that maybe that's something that should happen as well.
If you build it the right way, the sort of expected way that is out there, it seems like this is sort of, you're kind of sidestepping the regular build process, right?
Well, I guess that's the question. What's the regular build process? Because some folks are just going to want the binary version, right? Some people...
Right, yeah.
I realize we're talking about admins here, but not every admin knows how to compile code, I suppose.
Right.
And I know that I've downloaded stuff that I could have built from source had I wanted to, but I chose to use somebody else's compiled version. And
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Once there's malicious compiled code, it's a different animal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Because you're right. You can see the in the Git and you can see the code, and that's not where the problem is. It's that somebody else kind of sets you up to fail, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. That's curious. Was there more than one place to get the Webmin compiled version? I mean, is it maybe that only certain... Yeah, because you mentioned SourceForge, which is one possible place of getting it, but I imagine the code is available many, many places?
Yeah, so it mentioned the official downloads, which typically are hosted on GitHub also, right? If you go onto the releases kind of tab, you can download directly from there. Or, yeah, again, you can have a third-party hosting like SourceForge. But one comment interesting, that kind of Joe brought up is, you typically, or it's depending on how software is built, you typically go in through the Git flow and you can see it kicked off a build and what processes it went through. But you don't actually know if that's what executable is uploaded to the releases page, right? There is several places I think there is opportunity. Again, each project's probably different in how they build, but where potentially something gets injected that kind of takes it off the official route.
So what would you recommend people do?
Well, I think one big thing is obviously, you have to check your builds. Maybe certainly given this incident, review your entire pipeline. Make sure you understand, every step, whatever tools you're using. A lot of them tend to be free for open source projects. And just understand and validate that the build that you create is what you expect getting posted for everybody.
I wonder, is there something that could be done to sort of hash the compiled code to verify that nothing was injected?
Yeah, I mean, that typically changes per build. So if this was injected through their official build pipeline, the hash that gets presented on the releases page is going to match, right, what was published. So it'd be difficult to have one standard hash.
Yeah, it might be an area for some automated error checking, but interesting. Anyway.
Yeah. I've heard of something called reproducible builds, which is sort of a way of doing a control build of software so that you can actually have a signed version with a hash somewhere, and then you build it yourself and you match up the hashes in the signature and you say, yeah, good, it built exactly the way I expected to and there's no extra anything in there. But if you're building the code yourself, I mean, for your platform and for the libraries you've got, it becomes harder to do something like that. It's a goal to aim for, but I feel like in a real environment, it becomes very, very difficult to actually do that. Or you'd have to have like multiple different reproducible build versions with this flag and that thing and that set,
right,
and all the different combinations thereof. But maybe we'll get there.
You're always told, open source, get the most eyes on it, the most contributors, the most people checking for problems. Well, if the posted open source code is legit and then the compiled code isn't, where you got to kind of question where the process breaks down.
I realize that it is convenient to have code that's already compiled and simply run it, but I guess this case shows that you can't always trust precompiled code.